One evening, our car suddenly started making a strange noise as Armin arrived home from work. What unsettled me wasn't the sound itself, but the balance sitting in our bank account. My mind immediately began doing the numbers. If the car really broke down tomorrow, where would we find the money to pay for it? I could barely fall asleep that night. It wasn't because a repair bill had arrived, but because we had nothing protecting us if it did. That was the moment I quietly realized something. We hadn't been living with peace of mind. We had simply been hoping nothing would go wrong. The next morning felt like any other. I made breakfast while Mira got ready for school, and everything followed our usual routine. Even with everything moving as usual, my thoughts stayed on the expenses we might have to face. The worry quietly followed me through the morning. Every notification from the bank made me pause for a moment. I kept wondering if another unexpected expense had appeared. While shopping for the week, I found myself checking every item again before placing it in the cart. I quietly recalculated as I went. I often told myself that I would start saving if there was anything left at the end of the month. It sounded reasonable every time I said it. But somehow, there was always another reason the money disappeared first. By the end of each month, the same pattern quietly repeated itself. The more closely I looked at our spending, the more one thing stood out. It wasn't only about how much we earned. Whenever money arrived, our first thought was always the next bill. We rarely thought about what should be protected first. I opened our financial notes from the past few months. The same pattern kept showing up again and again. We could manage our everyday needs without much trouble. But we never truly set money aside for the unexpected. I kept telling myself, we'll do it when things feel easier. Yet that moment never seemed to arrive. That was when I quietly asked myself one difficult question. Were we waiting for the right time, or simply postponing our fear? I began noticing something that felt uncomfortable. We always managed to find money when an emergency had already happened, but somehow never before it did. It felt as though I was always running after problems. I wasn't preparing before they arrived. Then I decided to add everything up. I wanted to see how many small expenses we could delay without changing the way we lived. The total was larger than I had expected, not because we spent carelessly, but because so many small decisions happened without us noticing. I stopped thinking about an emergency fund as one huge number. Instead, I found myself seeing the small habit we had never built. And for the first time, I believed that feeling secure might not begin with thousands of dollars. It might begin with one small decision repeated every time we received our income. From the outside, our life still looked perfectly ordinary. We laughed together over dinner at our small kitchen table, just like we always did. Myra happily talked about her day at school. Armin joked the way he always did after coming home from work. But inside my mind, I kept calculating every worst-case scenario that could happen at any time. The thoughts never stayed quiet for very long. I was beginning to feel tired from carrying that worry by myself. No one was placing that weight on me, but it still felt heavy. I didn't want my family to live with fear, but I also didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine. I realized the hardest part wasn't having less money. It was living with uncertainty quietly following us every single day. One afternoon, I caught myself staring at my phone for longer than I realized. Mira walked over with quiet curiosity, trying to understand what had captured all of my attention. "Mom, why do you look sad?" she asked. Her simple question left me without an immediate answer. I smiled and told her everything was fine. Inside, I was wondering what would happen if our family ever faced a real emergency. Myra wrapped her arms around me without saying a word. That small hug felt heavier than every number I had been looking at in our bank account. In that moment, I realized children may not understand money. Even so, they always seem to notice when their parents are carrying quiet worries. I didn't want Mira to remember me as a mother who was always worried. I wanted her to remember this home as a place that always felt safe, whatever tomorrow might bring. That night, I sat alone with our budget notebook open once again. This time, I wasn't looking for what had gone wrong, but for a way forward. I realized we had always waited until there was enough money before saving anything. Yet a sense of security had never come from waiting for the perfect moment. I finally made one simple rule for our family. Every time money came in, we would set aside $10 before using it for anything else. I called it the $10 start method. It wasn't about the amount, but about choosing security first. We kept that money in a separate account. It stayed away from the everyday expenses that always seemed urgent. That was the day I understood something I hadn't seen before. An emergency fund begins when we stop delaying the very first small step, not when life finally becomes easy. The next evening, after Mira had gone to bed, I asked Armand if we could sit and talk for a while. It wasn't about everything we lacked, but about the sense of peace we hoped to build together. "I'm tired of always living with the fear that something might happen," I quietly admitted. Armand simply nodded and listened without interrupting. He admitted that he had been anxious too for a long time. He had simply kept those feelings to himself because he didn't want me to worry even more. Together we agreed that an emergency fund should come first. It shouldn't be whatever happened to remain after everything else was spent. We started looking for a few small expenses that we could reduce. It wasn't about making life harder, but about slowly buying a little more peace of mind. Nothing extraordinary happened that night. It was simply two people sharing the same direction for the first time and quietly beginning to walk toward it together. A few weeks later, our emergency fund was still small. Even so, every new number in that account made my chest feel a little lighter. My phone no longer filled me with instant panic whenever it buzzed. I knew we were slowly building a small cushion for unexpected days. Grocery shopping felt calmer than it used to. I no longer felt the need to spend every dollar that came in. At the end of each week, Armand started checking our emergency fund with me. It felt less like carrying a burden alone and more like building something together. Mira probably had no idea how much money was in our account, but she had started seeing us smile more often without the weight of quiet worry. Our home had not become more luxurious. Little by little, though, it felt much safer than it had before. I learned that financial security doesn't always begin with a high income. More often, it starts with one small decision that is repeated every time money comes in. An emergency fund is more than money set aside. It quietly holds hope, peace of mind, and the courage to face tomorrow without unnecessary fear. If this story stayed with you today, I'd be grateful to have you join us here at Clara's Family Journal. We can keep learning how to build a calmer family, one small step at a time. Now I'd love to hear your story. What has been the biggest obstacle that's kept you from starting an emergency fund?